This episode of Lex Out Loud is brought to you by my patrons, readers, and listeners. If you'd like to learn how to support this podcast, visit lexstarwalker.com/support. You're listening to episode 56 of Lex Out Loud, Writing Science Fiction. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. This show is a chronicle of my journey as a science fiction novelist. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. So glad that you joined me for another episode of Lex Out Loud. Apologies that it's been a little while since the last episode, but I have been keeping busy with various things, so didn't have a chance to record until now. So I wanted to let you know just the other day, it was last week actually, I got the honor and privilege to be interviewed on a YouTube channel, the channel Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain by Matt Yancik. And it's a role-playing game channel mostly, where he interviews various game masters and people in the industry, game designers and things like that, about the art of game mastering. So very relevant to my other podcast, Game Master's Journey. And Matt has been a listener of mine on this show and Game Master's Journey and GM Intrusions before that. And we've corresponded a bit by email here and there through the years. And so it was really cool when I received his invitation to go on his show. So we live streamed that last week, and it's up on YouTube now, the interview that we did. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. If I can, I'll embed the video right in the show notes. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that or not. But either way, if you head over to lexstarwalker.com/LOL, /056 for the show notes for this episode, you'll get a link to that video interview I did with Matt. And we talked about creativity and game mastering and writing and all kinds of stuff. And Matt had sent me quite a list of questions that he was going to kind of cherry pick from for our interview. And, you know, if you know me from Game Master's Journey at all, at as in my role as a game master, then you know that I like to be prepared. So I actually sketched out answers to all these questions. And even though we did, I think it was like an hour and a half, 45-minute interview, something like that, we didn't get to all of it. In fact, I don't think we even got to half of it. So I thought it would be fun to go over the stuff that we didn't get to. So as I said, we talked about a variety of topics spanning writing to game mastering and other topics. And so when I decided to do this, I realized that some of the questions he had would be great for this show, would be great for Lex Out Loud. And then some of the questions would be better suited for Game Master's Journey. So I'm going to use them for both shows. So I'll address some of them today on Lex Out Loud, and then here in the near future, when I record the next episode of Game Master's Journey, I will answer some of the questions there. So, you know, if you go watch Matt's video, you could consider this discussion today part 2 of my discussion with him. And then the upcoming Game Master's Journey episode will be part 3. So I am not going to answer the questions that he asked me on the interview, because I want you to go check that out on Matt's channel. So I don't think it would be very cool or sporting of me to reproduce that on my podcast. So yeah, I'm not going to answer those again, the ones that we talked about on his show, but there were a number of very good questions that he had asked me that I've already answered, at least on paper, that we didn't get to. So those are going to be what I'm talking about today and what I talk about in the next episode of Game Master's Journey. So thank you to Matt for coming up with these questions that are going to be what we're going to be talking about today. And also a shout out and thank you to my wife, Nikki, who, if everything works out the way I hope, is going to be asking me the questions that I'm going to answer. So it won't sound quite so much like I'm just talking to myself. So hopefully you will hear Nikki asking the questions. If you hear me asking the questions, then you know that something went wrong in the production process and we couldn't make it work with Nikki. But I'm going to try. But the actual questions come from Matt Yancik. So again, Matt, thank you so much for the questions. And we're just going to dive in. So let's have the first question.
How do RPGs and writing fit into your life? What sort of role do they serve for you?
So writing is what I do. It's what I am. I am a science fiction writer, a sci-fi novelist, writing realistic sci-fi because I've decided to start calling it realistic sci-fi because I really don't like calling it mundane science fiction. Which is kind of the term that's been coined. I don't know who came up with that term for what I'm writing, the kind of science fiction I'm writing, but it's frankly a terrible term. First of all, it's terrible because mundane does not have a good connotation to it. It makes it sound boring. That's one possible definition of mundane, boring and run of the mill and, nothing interesting to see here, which hopefully that is not the case with my science fiction. And also, I just think it's not a good term just flat out. I mean, not only because of the negative connotation associated with it, but also because even, quote, mundane science fiction isn't mundane. I mean, mundane would be contemporary fiction. That would be mundane. So it's just a horrible, horrible term. I apologize to whoever came up with it. I have no idea who coined the term, but they should have done a better job. Should have spent some more time with that thesaurus and dictionary, maybe. So I choose to call it realistic sci-fi because when people are talking about mundane science fiction, that's what they're talking about. The point isn't that it's mundane, that it's boring or uninteresting. The point is that it's realistic, that it is a future that we can see on the horizon. It's not full of magic or technology so advanced it might as well be magic, technology beyond our understanding of science today. So realistic sci-fi is sci-fi that, occurs in the near future and doesn't have magic in it. So no things like warp drives or any kind of faster than light travel, usually not aliens, no transporters, no magical shields around your ship, none of that stuff. So none of the very popular trappings of space opera that we're all so used to. So that's what I write. I write realistic science fiction, and that's what I do. And I am a writer. Gaming, on the other hand, specifically tabletop RPGs, are my hobby. I do those for fun, and I enjoy playing games. I enjoy running games, but it's definitely at the end of the day a lower priority to me than my novel writing. That said, though, I do think that when I am game mastering, I am working a lot of the same muscles, the same creative and intellectual muscles that I use as a writer. So it's relevant to it and it's good practice for it in a lot of ways. But it is something I do for fun. The thing that I love about writing compared to playing or running a role-playing game is that it's all up to me. It's all on me. Succeed or fail, it's all me. Whether or not I finish a novel is my choice. And and it's all on me. I either do it or I don't do it. There's no one else to blame. The buck stops here. No one else can ruin it for me. No one else can stop me from doing it or finishing it. I've had some bad experiences in the past as a game master that have really driven home to me how in an RPG, you really are dependent on other people in order to not only have a good time, but just to even enjoy the hobby at all. You're dependent on the players if you're the game master. If they let you down, if they don't show up, if they quit, or if they're just terrible players, then all the time and work and cool ideas that you put into that campaign are for nothing if you can't run it for people. It's all for nothing. And that's happened to me more than once in the past where I put a lot of work into a campaign and something out of my control happens and it's never realized and it all goes to waste. That can never happen with a novel. So that's to me, a really important distinction. And one of the reasons I enjoy writing so much is because I don't have to rely on anyone else. I only need to rely on myself. And I've learned I'm a pretty dependable guy. So it works out.
So you write for both RPGs and novels. Would it be fair to say they're very different animals?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, it's fair to say that writing a novel and writing, say, an adventure for an RPG are very different animals. But in a lot of ways, they're also the same. I mean, for one thing, writing is writing, right? I mean, when you're writing an RPG book, like an adventure or something, I don't know, I guess you'd call it fiction. It's not nonfiction, that's for sure. But it's not, you're not really writing a story. It's more of almost like a how-to kind of thing. But you're still using language. You're still having to create sentences that make sense and chain them together into paragraphs that make sense and put those paragraphs together into chapters that make sense. So, in the sense of spelling and grammar and being clear and communicating ideas, writing is writing. So there's a lot of similarity there. Also, world building is world building. You might focus more on certain areas of a setting if you're building for a game versus a novel. But in my experiences, they're basically the same thing. World building for a D&D game or whatever game you're playing, or world building for a novel that you're going to write, it's basically the same thing. There's not a whole lot of difference there. At least for me, there's not. Making NPCs for a role-playing game that you're going to run and making characters for a novel that you're going to write, again, basically the same thing. Making a character is making a character. Now, for a novel, you don't need stats for them, but you need, physical description. You need idea of what their personality is like, how they talk, things like that. So, again, there's a lot of commonality between creating an NPC for a game and creating a character for a novel. In fact, I'd say there's more that is the same than there is different. And the same thing when it comes to the writing and the same thing when it comes to world building. Now, of course, part of this depends a bit on your approach to how you run a game as a game master and also your approach to how you write a novel as a writer. But with the way that I approach both those things, they're very, very similar. As a GM, I want to be prepared, and I usually am prepared, but I also want the players to be free to do anything that they want to do. So I'm always ready to improvise. As a writer, I've become more of a discovery writer these days. Some writers plan out the entire book before they write it. I've done that. That's what I did for my first novel, but I don't do it that way anymore. You can end up with some very contrived plots that way, I think. Not saying that everyone who approaches books that way end up with contrived plots, but I think oftentimes when you find a contrived plot, that's it was a book that was outlined ahead of time. It probably wasn't discovery written. That'd be interesting to see how you could come up with a contrived plot if you're discovery writing. I think it would be pretty hard to do. So instead of outlining or planning things ahead of time, I create my characters and I create the setting, and then I come up with an initial situation to put the characters in, some kind of obstacle they have to overcome or a problem they have to solve. And then, the inciting incident, the thing that happens that changes things for the characters and puts our story into motion. So the characters are just living their lives, going about their day. And then something interesting and unusual happens that changes everything. And that's the beginning of the story. So at that point, writing the novel for me becomes very much like running an RPG for myself. I have my characters in a situation, and just as a player, I would ask, what's my character going to do now? I do the same thing for the main character in my novel. And then just as a GM, once the player character asks or acts, I would ask myself as a GM, okay, how do the NPCs respond to that? Or, what are the consequences of that going to be? I do the same thing as a novelist, deciding once, my main character does or says something, how do the other characters react? What happens next? So it's very much the same process. So writing a scene is something like, character A says something, and then I ask myself, how does character B respond? And then character B responds, and then I ask, how does character A respond to that? And so on. So it is very much going through the same steps that I go through as a GM. The only difference is there aren't players there. It's just all going on in my head.
What do you enjoy about writing prose versus for RPGs?
So as I already mentioned, one thing I really prefer about writing prose or novels is that it's all on me. It can't be ruined by flaky players that don't show up. Again, whether I succeed or fail, it's all on me. And I much prefer that, especially when you're talking about my livelihood. Another thing I really like about writing a novel is that I can make it perfect, or at least as close as I can get to perfect. Matt brought this up in our interview on his channel, but what he said was running an RPG is like the first draft, and then he gets done with the session and he wishes, now that he could revise it and make it better. To me, I kind of look at it from the perspective of a musician. Running an RPG is like performing as a musician, where, you get up on stage and you perform your piece of music and that's it. You're done. You got to live with it. And if you made some mistakes or maybe you didn't do some things as well as you would have liked, too bad. That's what you did. That's what the people heard. That's what they got. That's the performance they enjoyed. So that's very much like running an RPG for your friends. On the other hand, writing a novel is more like, as a musician, recording an album in a studio, where if you make a mistake, you can go back and do it again and re-record that part of the song. And you can do it over and over as many times as you want, or as much as you can afford studio time for. You can redo it or change it as many times as you want until you get it just the way you want it, just the way you like it. And that's how writing a novel is. No novel, at least no novel worth reading, is written in one draft. They're written over many drafts. So, you start out with kind of a rough idea or a rough sketch, but through the revision process, you refine it and polish it until you hopefully end up with something really, really cool that is far, far beyond what you could ever hope to accomplish in one single draft. Another great kind of metaphor, I guess, for writing a novel that I sometimes think about is carving a sculpture. Now I don't really know anything about sculpting, but I imagine the way that would work is you would start out with your block of wood or stone, and, maybe you're going to carve, I don't know, a horse or something. And, you'd start out with a very rough shape of this horse that you would carve out of this block of material. And then once you get that rough shape down, then you start going over it and refining it and adding like, smaller and smaller details like the fur or the hair or the flow of the mane and the tail or the shapes of the eyes and all these things. But you don't do all that in just one pass and it's done. You start really rough and then you polish more and more and more. And that's very much how the writing process is. It's kind of funny because I really enjoy that. And that's one of the things I love about writing is how you can just polish and make it better. And that's why it's a mystery to me when I hear so many writers talk about how much they hate editing. And I just don't get it because how can you hate editing? Would you really want to have to, sink or swim based off of your first draft? I certainly wouldn't. And, I find that process of taking, what's hopefully a decent book that I just wrote and taking it to the next level, I find that very enjoyable. And I really don't understand writers who don't.
Can you tell us about sitting down to write that first novel? How has your approach evolved? Your first novel versus Critical Balance, for instance.
Yeah, so the process actually did evolve a lot. Kind of went from one side of the spectrum to the opposite side of the spectrum. I approached my first novel, Dawn of Endless Night, which was an urban fantasy, much more as an outliner and a planner. I came up with an extensive outline ahead of time. I had every single chapter outlined, and within each chapter, I had every single scene outlined, beginning, middle, end of the novel. It was all outlined before I even started writing chapter one. So when I sat down and wrote the first sentence of the first page of chapter one, I already knew everything that was going to happen in the book. I knew exactly how it was going to end. And then I wrote it. So my second book, the one I just finished, Critical Balance, again, was an approach almost opposite of that. Once I had the world building done and the characters made, and I figured out my beginning situation, I just went forward and very much approached it as a discovery writer. I had that beginning situation. I had some ideas of what the characters might try to deal with that. And I just went from there, as I've discussed, just going step by step through each scene, asking myself, okay, here's the situation that the character's in. What do they do? What do they say? And then what happens next? And that's how I wrote the book. Now, I do have to add here, this wasn't part of the question, but a natural kind of follow-up to this is, well, which do you prefer? You've tried two very different methods. You've tried both sides of this dichotomy that writers often talk about between the outliner or planner and the discovery writer, or the pantser, as some people call it. So, it's probably obvious I prefer the one I'm doing now, which is the discovery writing approach. Not only is there the issue of having a contrived seeming plot that you run into when you plan. The real reason, though, that I like my new method better is it's a lot more fun for me. I had a lot of fun with, I'd say, probably the first half of Dawn of Endless Night. And then after that, I had less and less fun the further I got into the book. And it took me a long time to finish it. It took me a lot longer to write the last quarter of the book than it took me to write the first half of the book. And the reason was I didn't realize it at the time. All I knew was that I wasn't enjoying it anymore and I didn't want to do it anymore. And I would find any excuse I could not to do it. But now I understand that a big part of the reason that was going on was that I was bored with it. And that was a large part due to the fact that I had known since I started writing chapter one, everything that was going to happen, how it was going to end. So there were no surprises. There were no moments of discovery. That all happened when I was making the outline. So, a lot of my moments of fun and discovery and excitement happened when I was making the outline, which no one wants to read an outline. You still got to write a book after that. And it's almost like I'd used up all my good energy and my good juice and my good creativity doing the outline. And when it came time to write the actual novel, which is what the reader is going to read, they're not going to read my outline. I was tired of it. And it was, same old to me. And I was ready to go on to the next thing and be excited about something new. And now I had this chore of writing this 100,000+ word book, that I was no longer excited about because I'd already been there, done that. I often talk about it. It's like watching a movie that you've seen many, many times before. It's like maybe you really like this movie, and so you're going to watch it for the 10th time. But it's nothing like the experience you had the first time you watched it, because there's no surprises. There's no excitement because you already have the thing memorized. You already know everything that's going to happen before it happens. You know what every character is going to say before they say it. So that doesn't even compare to the first time you saw the movie and everything was a surprise and a discovery. So contrast that with the book I just wrote, where that wasn't the experience I had because I did not know how it was going to end. I did not know what every scene was going to be before I wrote it. So every day was a day of discovery and excitement, and it carried through the entire book. Even when I was writing the last page of the book, I was still as into it as I was when I was writing the first page. So, it was a very clear difference to me. It was a very marked difference. So if you're listening to this and you're a writer who has only done outlining and you've never tried the discovery method, give it a try. You owe it to yourself to at least give it a try. When I wrote Dawn of Endless Night, and since then, even when I was starting to get ready to write this book I just wrote, I always thought I was an outliner. I never even really considered being a discovery writer, because anytime I heard writers talk about the two, the outlining thing just made sense to me, and it just seemed to fit the way my brain works. So to me, it was like a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, obviously I'm not going to be a discovery writer. I don't understand that mystical stuff. I'm an outliner and a planner and all this stuff. And I really thought I was. And I only tried the discovery thing partly as an experiment, because Stephen King's a big discovery writer. And I was listening to On Writing by him and kind of wanted to try what he was talking about. So part of it was just to experiment, but part of it was also because I was trying to come up with a quote plot for my book, and I wasn't coming up with anything I liked. And I was starting to feel like I was spending too much time spinning my wheels and not producing anything. And I thought, you know what, let's just start discovery writing this. And at least we're putting words on the page, and, maybe we end up throwing a lot of it out, but at least I'll be doing something and I can get some momentum. And that's why I tried it. I didn't really think I was going to be a discovery writer. I assumed at some point I'd figure out a plot and I'd go outline it like I did the last book. But I learned something about myself as a writer. I learned that I have a lot more fun discovery writing. So no matter how strongly you feel that you are an outliner, if you've never legitimately tried discovery writing a novel, I really strongly encourage you to do so, because you may be like me and think you're an outliner and find out that you're much, much happier as a discovery writer. And honestly, I think discovery writers produce better books, honestly, at least better in the sense of they produce books that I enjoy reading more. Let's put it that way. We could argue all day about which book is better than which book. But as far as, the books that I really enjoy reading, they tend to be discovery written.
Do you have a favorite character, world, or creation that you have particularly enjoyed working on or with? Why so?
Absolutely, I do. My favorite thing, I guess, that I've worked on or created is the setting that I created for the book I just finished, Critical Balance. It's my best idea of where we could be in 200 years with these city-sized Kalpana cylinders that rotate for gravity. The cylinder city my book is set in, Union City, can hold up to 750,000 people, about the size of Seattle. It was built in cooperation by 34 nations of Earth, and peoples from all those countries live and work together in harmony on the cylinder. I love my main character, Tia Moreno. She's awesome. She's far from perfect. She has some things to work through and to overcome. And she goes through a lot in the story, but ultimately, I think ends up being pretty heroic in her way. And it's a story about her proving to herself and to everyone else what she's capable of. And I'm really proud of the setting. I'm really proud of the character. I'm really proud of the story. I'm really happy with all of it. But I really love the setting. If you've listened to this show long, you know that I've been collecting ideas for this setting for over 13 years. And I love these cylinder space stations. I could go on about them for days. I am really hoping when I get a publisher that I will be able to have appendices in my book. I want to have a glossary. I want to have a timeline that gives major events between right now and when the story takes place. And I would also love to be able to write like an essay about these cylinders stations and how they work, how the rotational gravity works and all that stuff. Because this is all based on real science. It's based on real designs that real engineers have come up with. I mean, they're not real things in the sense that no one's built one yet, but they're real things in the sense of, you know, some writer like me didn't just make this stuff up. I mean, this stuff was figured out by scientists and engineers, and it's all legit. So, you know, you may have heard of O'Neill cylinders before. They've gotten a little bit of popularity lately because Jeff Bezos is into them. But I wish Jeff Bezos had done more research and gotten below the surface and gotten down to the Kalpana cylinders, which I think are more beautiful and awesome and elegant and simple than the O'Neill cylinders. O'Neill cylinders require two cylinders together to rotate stably. Kalpanas don't. They only need the one. And they just look cooler, honestly. A Kalpana cylinder would be a gorgeous place to live with fresh air, fresher than a lot of us breathe today, especially if you live in a city. Locally grown, all natural food from 34 different cultures. Beautiful skyscrapers that are works of art unto themselves. I literally dream about this place sometimes. I wish I dreamed about it every night. It's a great place to be in a dream. I love that it shows a hopeful view of the future where we've learned to work together as a species, mostly. I mean, of course, not everyone gets along, but a lot of people do. At the same time, I feel it's just as hopeful as Star Trek is, while being more believable and relatable for more people. It's really hard to reconcile the world of Star Trek with our world today. I don't really think you can. The world of Star Trek is so idealized, it's such a utopia that it's really like, how would we get from where we are today to where that is, unless you're talking thousands of years, which it's not. I think Star Trek would be a lot more believable if it was a few thousand years in the future instead of a few hundred. So, you know, this world that I've created is more immediate, more believable, and more relatable in that way, I think.
What prompted you to write Critical Balance? How has it been coming along?
So I started collecting ideas over 13 years ago for a science fiction setting when I was still working on my first novel, Dawn of Endless Night. I've always watched science and astronomy documentaries and any kind of show about space exploration, science, that kind of stuff that I can find. I watch, I absorb like a sponge. And so, yeah, over 13 years ago, I was watching a lot of this stuff because I finally had cable, or actually, I think it was satellite at that time, but had access to more than just a few channels. And so could see all this stuff. And I was watching a lot of it. So I started collecting ideas in a notebook every time I would be watching one of these shows and just see something really cool that I thought was cool. I'd write it down in this notebook. And as these ideas accumulated, I started putting them together into an idea for a setting using, my favorites from these really cool ideas of science and astronomy and space exploration. So the actual seed of the setting and the novels was an image I had of my cylinder city, very much as it is now. There were a few alterations to the dimensions of it, but the gist of it was there. At the time, I pictured it as an almost beer can shaped structure in geostationary orbit over Earth, connected to the Earth by a space elevator. So it'd look a lot like, in those old timey TV shows where the kids would take like the 2 tin cans and put a string between them to like talk to each other, which by the way, that never worked. I tried that as a kid. It never worked, but it worked on TV. So it would kind of look like that, like this can on a string swinging around the Earth. That was the seed, the idea seed that became the setting. At the time, I didn't even know what an O'Neill or a Kalpana cylinder was. I knew of rotational gravity. I knew that you could create artificial gravity that way. And I just thought a cylinder would look cool. That's really as far as it went back then. So over, the past 13 plus years, I kept collecting these ideas. About 2 or 3 years ago, I began working in earnest on the setting when I decided I would finally write this novel. I spent over a year just working on the world building and doing lots and lots and lots of research into things I needed to learn more about to flesh everything out and figure out how all the pieces fit together in the setting, and also to figure out the timeline. Because again, I'm going for realism, so I didn't want to just pull some number out of the air like I think Star Trek did back in the day. I wanted to actually base my prediction on how far in the future this story takes place on more than just pulling a number out of the air. I wanted to base it on reality as much as I could. So I did a lot of research into futurism and read various books and papers on what different people thought as far as how long it would take to develop various types of technology like nanotechnology and lowering cost of getting into low Earth orbit, and at what point could we build a space elevator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is, I can't predict the future any better than anyone else, but it's based on current knowledge as much as it can be. And I really enjoyed the research and the world building. And in fact, I just realized or just remembered that I was thinking I would do some more research in world building before I start the next book, just to flesh things out even more, just to add. I thought every time I do a book, I should add more to the setting, add more depth. So I should really do that because I think that'd be a lot of fun. And I need to remember to do that because I'm really, really chomping at the bit to get writing on that second book. So I'm gonna need to force myself to take some time to do some research first because I think that would be a good thing to do. So I didn't even start thinking about the characters or the plot of the story until I pretty much had the world building done. I had the setting where I wanted it, complete with a timeline going from the present day to 200 years in the future. Actually, it goes farther than that, but the story takes place at 200 years in the future. I figured out every major accomplishment in technology and space exploration that would be needed to get us where we need to be as far as how settled the solar system is and what kind of technology we have for the story I wanted to tell. So I did all of that before I even started thinking about characters or the plot. Once I had the world building done, the next thing I did was start thinking about characters, and started with my main character, Tia Moreno. So I know I've talked a lot about this book on the show, but I don't know that I've ever given you any kind of teaser for it. Now that I'm almost done with the third draft, as of recording this, I have 2 more chapters in the third draft to do, and then the third draft is done. And I finally now, I think, feel that I'm at a point where I can at least attempt to give you a little blurb about this book. So this isn't a synopsis. I'm not going to spoil the book. This is more like what you would read on the back cover of a paperback or the inside flap of a hardback. So this is the first draft of that, but it'll give you an idea of what we're talking about here. Tia Moreno is a 22-year-old roboticist who has just moved to the newly constructed Union City, an 8-kilometer diameter cylinder capable of housing 750,000 people, which lies at the top of the Earth space elevator. Tia is adjusting to her new home, a new job, and a new friend when she is pulled into the investigation of strange occurrences in the city. Ultimately, Tia must face an evil the likes of which the cylinders have never seen before, an evil that threatens the lives of everyone in Union City. She must find the hero within herself if she's to save herself, her friends, and her community. So that's what the book's about. So at this point, I've written the first book. As I said, I'm about done with the third draft. I sent the second draft out to a few alpha readers, got feedback. Now I've done a third draft based on that. I'm sending that out to a few more alpha readers. When I get their feedback, I will do the fourth draft and then send that out to beta readers and then do another draft after that. And then I'll start sending it out to agents, trying to find an agent to represent me to get this published with a big publisher. I also plan to write numerous books in this setting. That's one of the reasons I allowed myself a year of world building. It was a calculated decision because I plan to write many, many books in the setting. Basically, I plan to write at least one book a year, hopefully 2, in this setting until I die, which will hopefully be a long time from now. So I really hope people like this book because there's going to be a lot more to come. One of my goals with this series is to make it accessible to people who don't normally read science fiction. I personally don't think science fiction is nearly as popular as it should be, especially when it comes to books. And I think a lot of that is because it is not seen as accessible by a lot of people. And I think in a lot of ways that assessment is fair, especially when you're talking about older science fiction. A lot of that is not very accessible to a lot of people. And I think it's a little unfortunate. And I think we do a disservice to ourselves as science fiction writers and readers that when someone asks about science fiction, like what are some great science fiction books to read, that so often the books that are recommended are books from ages past that were written decades ago. And I think that we would be better served as a genre to recommend more recent science fiction where the focus has shifted a great deal. A lot of the old, quote, classic science fiction was very focused on ideas and trying to get ideas of science and exploration and things like that across. And there was less focus on developing characters and making believable characters, less focus on the story, things like that. Also, some of those books are really problematic because they were written in a different time where people were more tolerant of racism and sexism. And there's unfortunately a lot of that in some of these older science fiction books. Some of it kind of below the surface and some of it more overt. But yeah, and it's just like, you go read a book from 50 years ago, and unless you're really into reading, really into literature or something, probably won't be super enjoyable for you because, people talked and wrote very differently 50 years ago than we do now. So it's not going to seem current or be easy to read for someone who's a casual reader. So I would really love to do my part to kind of topple some of those old stereotypes and give people something newer to read and to recommend that hopefully doesn't have some of those downsides.
You've been at this for years. I think there are close to 300 episodes of Game Master's Journey now, and I think your first RPG stream was in 2015. How is it that you're such a prolific podcaster and streamer?
Well, those are good questions. I'm not sure, but I guess it's because I enjoy podcasting. I also enjoy teaching. So when I learn a new skill or a new fact, the first thing I want to do is pass it on to someone else. Also, like most writers, I like to talk. So, once I got on the podcasting horse, I think it's only natural that I've stayed on it. And I legitimately enjoy podcasting. It's a lot of fun for me. The only part of it that I don't enjoy so much is the editing, and I do a lot less of that than I used to. So yeah, I really enjoy it. It's a chance to talk about what I'm doing and share this book with people and talk about it and hopefully get people thinking about it in this kind of time before you can just go out and buy it and read it. And I love sharing what I learn with other people.
On a personal level, what do you get out of podcasting and streaming? Does it help your creative process at all? What do you think it says about you?
Lex Out Loud has definitely helped my process. It's very helpful for me to talk my ideas out loud. And even hearing them back later when I'm editing can be really helpful. It helps me refine my ideas, helps me know the good ideas from the not so good ones. It's also been really nice because writing can be a very solitary process. I mean, it is inherently a solitary act, especially when you don't have any books out yet for people to talk about. So it's helped a lot with that, with not feeling like I'm all by myself so much, because there are people now, who listen to the show and who are in my Discord who are excited about the book and looking forward to it. And that's really awesome and helps motivate me to keep going on those days when maybe it's a little difficult.
Is there a project, work, or accomplishment that you're particularly proud of?
Yes, for sure. My book, Critical Balance, that I'm finishing up the third draft on right now. I'm really proud of it. I think I already talked about some of the reasons why.
Is there a project that's been in the back of your mind for a long time that hasn't quite gelled yet? Do you have any plans to get to it in the future?
Yeah, this probably won't surprise anyone who's listened to my podcast, but I'd love to create my own tabletop RPG system. Ideally, it's one I could use to run games in the setting I've created for my novels. That would be super cool. It's still very much in the beginning planning stage. I have some design goals I've come up with it for it and some considerations and a few ideas, but that's about it. I just haven't found a system that's exactly what I'm looking for. I want a classless system where you can build any kind of character you want and you aren't stuck on one path. For example, like in D&D where you have a class and that limits you. I much prefer a game like World of Darkness where you just buy abilities. However, I also prefer a game that uses all the common polyhedrals, unlike, for instance, World of Darkness that only uses D10s. And I prefer a game that requires little to no math. So those are a lot of constraints. So yeah, maybe someday I'll figure this out, but probably not anytime soon.
If someone gave you an unlimited budget to develop your ultimate project, be it a role-playing game, a channel, or something else, what would it be?
That would be super cool. That's what that would be. Yeah, that would, that would be awesome. That would be a dream come true. As far as what I would do, that's easy. I would turn my Cylinder City Saga series of books into a full IP to the nines. I'd hire professional editors to maximize my chance of getting an agent with the first book. I'd even hire an artist to do a cover for me because if the money's truly limitless in this scenario, then why the hell not? And I actually already know who I'd ask to do it if he would do it. I don't know that it would actually help me at all get an agent, probably not, but it would just be cool to have a cover. So I would do that. I would hire literally dozens of consultants for my books, maybe far too many. I could use so many consultants, at least a few from each of the 34 nations in my city so that I could represent those countries and cultures well. Consultants for the various sciences, technology, sensitivity consultants for different genders and sexual preferences, etc. I mean, I could fill pages with people and areas of expertise I would like to consult for these books. And if I had the money, I would. I'd get an audiobook made with a really good reader. I mean, LeVar Burton would be great if he's available. And then once I'd done all that and I'd gotten the book published with a big publisher, then I'd throw a bunch of money at making it into a TV show. I have very little idea how that works, but I mean, most problems can be overcome by throwing enough money at them. So I'd find where to put that money and how to use it to maximize the odds of it getting optioned for a TV show. That would be awesome. And yeah, if I had that kind of money that you're talking about, then I could hire and pay people who know about that kind of stuff to figure that out for me. And then yeah, I'd get an RPG developed for it, or come up with one myself, or a combination of the two. And yeah, I don't know, maybe toys, models, a theme park. Why not? Let's do it all. Yeah, I would do all those things. If money were not an option, if I could have all the money I wanted, that's what I would do with it.
What are your plans for your podcasts and or channel in the future?
Well, I'm going to keep writing novels, and I will continue to chronicle that journey on Lex Out Loud. Ultimately, I would love to start doing interviews on this show with successful published authors, as well as editors and agents. But I really want to do that someday, but I'm not in a hurry to get to that, because interviews are very time consuming and difficult to produce. And also, I don't have any connections in the industry right now. So, I could probably reach out to some people on Twitter and whatnot and find some kind souls that would agree to do that. But I don't have any connections. I don't know anybody in the biz, as they say. So yeah, I'd have much better luck in the future after I've published some books and made some connections and friends in the business to be able to bring some people on the show to talk about writing and things like that. That would be really cool. I'm still working on getting Game Master's Journey going again. I want to do more of that show, but that involves me running and playing in more games. Which, time is limited, and even more than time, my creative energy and mental bandwidth are limited. So, I just do the best I can with that. And, someday I'd really love to produce my shows on YouTube or even move them to YouTube. I don't know how long podcasting is going to be around, but I think YouTube will be around longer, or something like it, a video medium like that. But unfortunately, I don't think that will happen until I can actually hire people to do the video production for me, because I just don't have the time to do it. And I also, honestly, I don't have the skills or the knowledge for video production to do it. I would have to learn a lot, and that all takes time. If you're talking anything beyond just a talking head YouTube channel, which is what I've done before, I don't have the know-how to do that. And I don't want to just do a talking head channel. I'd like to have, graphics and cool animations and stuff like that. So yeah, that'd be cool. Someday, maybe. I'd love to do that. All right. And that is the end of Matt's questions, at least what we're going to cover today on Lex Out Loud. Again, I answered a bunch of other questions of his on his YouTube channel, and I will have that linked in the show notes over at lexstarwalker.com, so you can go check out that interview. I'd really appreciate it. I'm sure Matt would appreciate it too. And for the third part of this extensive interview series, tune in to episode, what is it going to be? Episode 289 of Game Master's Journey, in which I will answer some of the other questions we didn't get to that are more related to game mastering and less about writing. But those were some of the more writing related questions and questions that were more or at least my answers were more about the book that I'm working on. So, yeah, that's all the questions. Thanks so much, Matt, for those. And I really had a good time with Matt. Hopefully, he'll have me on there again, and I think I'm going to have him on a future episode of Game Master's Journey once we decide what we're going to talk about. So you guys have that to look forward to as well. And let me think if there's anything else to let you know. As far as where I'm at, what I'm up to right now, like I said, I've got 2 more chapters left on the 3rd draft. So I hope to have that finished this week. And then I'm going to send that 3rd draft out to some more alpha readers. And then while they're chewing on that, I'm going to start working on the 2nd book. I'm not sure, it's been so long since I've thought much about the 2nd book, but I think I'm pretty much ready to just start writing it. I think I've got enough information. At least I've got as much as I did when I started Critical Balance. And I want to ride this discovery writing wave some more. So other than the world building and research I mentioned a little bit ago, I would like to at least take a few days, maybe a week or so, to revisit all my world building notes and do some more research and do some fleshing out of the setting, so I can have a little more depth to it in the 2nd book and have some more things to draw on. I'd love to do that, but man, other than that, I think I'm ready to just start writing the 2nd draft or the 1st draft of the 2nd book, which is super exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. I've been kind of going a little crazy. I miss drafting, and then we send that out, the 3rd draft out to the alphas, get that back, do a revision, send version 4 out to the betas, get back, do a revision, and then hopefully with that 5th draft, it'll be to the point that I'm ready to start querying agents. And speaking of which, I have another guest that I'm going to have on the show. Probably be a while, but about the time I start querying agents, I have a lady that I'm going to have on the show to talk about that. She's had more experience with it than I have, and so we're going to talk about that, and I'm really looking forward to having her on, and so it won't just be me. I got to remember how to do interviews again. I know how to do an interview, but the hardware side of it, setting that up, is quite an ordeal and complicated task that I have not done for a number of years now, I think, at this point. So, hopefully I can figure that out again, how to get all that set up so that the interview sounds decent. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. So just plugging along, and I guess the other thing on my plate right now is producing another episode of Game Master's Journey and getting that out so you guys can hear the rest of these interview questions. And we just keep on keeping on. So I want to thank you all for tuning in again, and thank you to all the patrons who support the show. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone in the Discord for hanging out with me there. It's always great to see people in the Discord. If you have any feedback or questions, or you just like to say hi, I would love to hear from you. You can email me at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at LexStarWalker, or you can call my voicemail 951-465-5391. If you didn't catch all of that, that's okay. Just head to the show notes at lexstarwalker.com/LOL, and all that information is there. You can find it there, along with a link to our Discord server if you'd like to join up in the Discord server, and you can hang out with myself and other listeners. And we talk about everything we talk about on this show, everything we talk about on Game Master's Journey: writing, creativity, game mastering, gaming, all that stuff, all kinds of stuff. And honestly, you can talk about anything you want as long as you're, not being a jerk. I can always add more rooms for more topics as they're needed. But yeah, so I really hope to see you in the Discord server. And whatever you're working on creatively, I wish you the best of luck. And I hope that whatever your goals are, that you are reaching them. And keep at it. And if you are writing something and you wouldn't mind sharing, giving us an idea what you're working on, telling us a little bit about it, feel free to do so in the Discord. I know I'd love to hear what you all are working on, and I'm sure other people would as well. So hopefully we'll see you there. That's it for me today. I will be back soon with another episode. Until then, keep writing.